Unapplied in Deposit Manager automates the application of unapplied money in NextGen practice management. Unapplied in Deposit Manager is the culmination of 15 years of writing custom scripts for NextGen practices to clean up their unapplied credits. All of that knowledge has been captured in a friendly, easy-to-use application where you get to tell it how you want to handle those credit balances. Unapplied in Deposit Manager consists of two components. There's the user interface, where you build your workflow through simple, guided rules. Additionally, there's a job which can be kicked off by the NextGen background business processor as a stored procedure. In production, you'd set up the rules, then allow the job to run nightly to populate the NextGen batches, which will be available for review the next morning. In test, you have the option of directly running the rules for several minutes against small sets of data to validate your rules. The user interface is registered into NextGen Practice Management as an add-on application. Typically, you'd only give this application to a couple people in your practice. This is to prevent people from creating rules that step on or contradict each other. Let's jump in and take a look at how this works. So we're going to go ahead and launch the Unapplied in Deposit Manager user interface. And on the top half of the screen, we have some rules that I've created already for this demonstration that I'll take you through. These rules also match the 4 common categories of unapplied cleanup that we see. The good news is you're not limited to these 4. You're only really limited by your need and your imagination. These 4, though, again, represent the common ones. So you could start with these and create variations, or you could start from scratch and create your own rules. Taking you through these rules, let's start with the top one, copay cleanup. This is the case where a client has come to us and said, we never had our copays set up right on the insurance. We've been taking them in as unapplied on the encounters, and for various reasons, they've never been applied to the actual charges. So if we know all the dollar amounts, can you go through and just get those dollar amounts applied, and that would clean up the vast majority of our copays. So the way this is represented in the Unapplied in Deposit Manager is we've built a rule, and these rules simply read from left to right. So if we start on the left, encounter unapplied equals specific amounts, apply it up to the unapplied amount. All right, so we're going to keep it on that encounter even if we create a credit because that money was taken specifically for that encounter. Now you could decide, you know what, we're only going to apply it up to the patient amount due, and that's really your call depending on what variation of the rule you want. Now the important part of this is we're looking for specific amounts. So for those rules that require additional parameters, there will be a button in the pop-up column. In this case, the button is labeled specific amount. It gives us the type of input that will allow us to designate those amounts. And we can add 1 of those, we can add 10 of those, we can add 20 of those. And then on the right in the summary column, it kind of builds out what the rule equates to, almost as a sentence, but somewhat shorthand just due to the lack of space. So if someone only needed 1 rule and they were only doing copay cleanup, we'd come in and just implement this 1 line here, and that would take care of what they needed. Now, there are other lines in here, but these lines are primarily to keep it from stepping on and conflicting with the other rules that are set up above. So in this case, we're going to skip encounters with certain transaction codes because that's being handled in one of the rules. And then we're going to skip unapplied that's been tagged, that's been marked for deposit money. And we'll talk about deposits in a few minutes. The more common case we run into is the need for a cleanup of their unapplieds. So the practice may have tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of money sitting out there in unapplied, and they're on a mission now to get that money out of unapplied, take it down against the line items, and maybe even, if they can't use the money at all, refund it back. So as we look in the lower part of the screen, we see our rules, right? Encounter unapplied equals patient amount, apply it up to the patient amount. Encounter unapplied is greater than the patient amount. Let's still apply it to the patient amount. Now, those of you who are keyed in on this have probably noticed that that may leave some money left in encounter unapplied. right? If it's greater than the patient amount and we only apply it up to the patient amount, we're going to have some money sitting there in encounter unapplied, and we'll talk about that in a couple more steps. If we're doing equals and greater than, obviously let's have a case for less than, if the encounter unapplied is less than the patient amount. And then last, what do we do with those remaining amounts on the encounters? So we've tried to apply the money, maybe there were no balances to apply it against, or maybe there was unapplied money that was greater than the patient amount. Well, we're going to move that up to the account. And the reason you'd likely move it up to the account is because at the account level, with account unapplied, you can then take that money and apply it against other encounters. So you can kind of move it along. The encounter scope options let you limit what's going to happen. It sets additional bounds around how this encounter unapplied processing is going to happen. Sometimes it can be used for prioritization, sometimes it can be used for constraints. There's various rules that can be built out. I'll show you how to do that in a couple moments here. But if we read this, encounter scope, skip encounter with certain transaction codes, again, this one is primarily just to avoid conflicts with our other rules. This next one, though, is even more important. This says, let's not process those encounters until the insurances are zero. So more succinctly, encounter scope, we're going to limit encounters to the ones where the insurances are zero, where they've been settled out, because in that case, you'll have a truer representation of the patient balance due. So we've talked about the encounter unapplied money and which encounters we're going to go process. Now we're going to talk about the account unapplied money. Maybe this is money that was taken in an account unapplied, or it was money moved up from the encounters. So this first rule again just says any money that we've tagged for deposits, go ahead and skip it for now. Don't process those here because we're going to do that as part of our deposit rules. After that, we have account unapplied remaining amount. Apply it to the oldest charge moving forward. So it's going to try and consume that account unapplied on other encounters that may have balances. All right, it's just going to continue to walk it forward till it runs out of unapplied money or places to apply it. Now, what can happen is you can end up with money indefinitely sitting in account unapplied. And we worked with several practices on a solution for that, and we came up with an aging scheme. So on this next line, account unapplied remaining amount, wait age, then create a new encounter with a dummy sim. And we can see what the parameters for that look like. So it's going to wait 45 days of no activity on the account. So no new encounters, no new appointments, no maintenance on the account. And then it's going to create a new encounter, and it's going to give it a dummy sim that you set up in file maintenance and give it whatever name you want. And it's going to have a $0 amount. What's going to happen then is when we put that unapplied money against that line item with a $0 amount, it's going to result in a line item credit. And of course, once you get it to the line item credit, you can go ahead and refund it back to the patient. In this case, you might want to use our refund manager tool for that, but you can certainly do it manually if you have some other process. And similarly, we can set the account scope to limit accounts where the insurances are zero across all the encounters. So similar to what we're doing here with the encounter scope, let's not even worry about the accounts until the insurances have settled out. Again, we're just making sure all those balances are taken care of. Now, if we wanted to add a rule to this, we could simply say add row. We could pick something like encounter scope, and then we could pick what we want to do. So in this case, we'll limit the encounters. And maybe we're looking for providers, locations, last names, amounts. And let's say we only want to do amounts that are from 0, and we'll pick maybe 2,000. Anything above that, we're going to go ahead and process manually. And we have the option here to create a task when the high amount is exceeded. So we put that in, and then in our summary off here to the right, it puts it limit encounters to unapplied amounts from 0 to 2,000. We can simply save this rule. It'll move this encounter scope up here where it belongs with the other encounter scopes. Now, once this rule is created, we can select if we want it to run once, nightly, or never. Never might be a rule that you're setting up to test and you only want to try it for a while and then it'll be done. Maybe this is your cleanup and you're doing your cleanup phase, and then when you're done with cleanup, you're going to retire this rule and maybe just bring it out once in a while to do those cleanups. You're going to have some other rules for your ongoing maintenance of the unapplied amounts. If we're just testing the rule, maybe it's the first night it's in production, we can go ahead and click once and then it'll run that night and then it'll set itself back to never. Or if we want it to run indefinitely, we can go ahead and click nightly. For the batch that'll be created by each set of rules, we can specify the descriptions for those batches, and that's important so you know what kind of processing to expect. Now normally you'd go ahead and save this, and then it would be picked up by the job and run. When you're testing, you don't want to wait overnight to get those results. You want to see what's going to happen, then come back and make tweaks, and then run it again. So in this case, we have the quick run button that lets you execute a rule for several minutes. Once it's done running, we get our results up above. The grid above shows a listing of transactions that were populated in NextGen on our behalf. In fact, we're going to go over and post that batch in a little bit. If I scroll down, I can see a couple encounters that were created using that dummy sim we talked about. So this is the case where money was moved down from the account level to the unapplied, through the unapplied and to the encounter. So now we have a line item credit, and I'll show you this here in a moment. So we're done with this job. Let's pop back into NextGen and let's find our batch. And we can go ahead and post this. The magic in this is that it's doing work on your behalf. It's creating those transactions on your behalf. You don't have to do all that data entry. So these are just standard NextGen batches. You can delete transactions out of them. You can add transactions to them if you see a couple you want to do manually. We follow all the NextGen rules. So let's take a look at one of these encounters. Let's go to 1284. And we'll see this is the new encounter that was created. It put the dummy sim out there with $0 due, and it moved our account unapplied amount down here, creating a $111 credit. So again, a good way to keep money from languishing in account unapplied also. Let's go back to the Unapplied and Deposit Manager and talk about the couple other rules that are available here. We have some clients who have moved to third-party systems for taking payments. And on those third-party systems, the money may come in via Rosetta through some HL7 type interface. So the money will land on the encounter, and normally the money is taken before there are charges on the encounter, and it'll end up in unapplied. What happens due to various timing issues is often that money can languish in unapplied. So we created a simple rule just to go ahead for that transaction code that comes in over Rosetta and apply those. So this is a case where we have the equals, greater than, and less than, just like before. We may wait until the insurance is equals 0. And then we're looking for that specific transaction code for this rule where the unapplied amount came from the kiosk. And again, if we wanted to specify other transaction codes, we could add those to the list. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about as part of our demonstration here today is deposit management. Deposit management is something truly unique to the Unapplied and Deposit Manager. One of the things about deposits is that the patients give you money for a specific purpose. It's not they're giving you a check to pay down their balances. They're giving you money for a specific future use. So as part of the deposit management for this, we set up with you a cross-reference of transaction codes used to intake the money versus the procedures, the SIMs, the money can be used on. These rules here just basically tell it to use the deposit functionality, what we call tagging the money. It sees the money come in, it tags it, it holds onto it, and then only uses it for that specific purpose. These cross-references are just putting the transaction codes on the left, giving it a name, and then on the right specifying the SIM or a modality that the SIM needs to belong to that it can be used against. All right, this prevents that money accidentally being used for general visits. So in this case, for fertility, transaction code the money would be taken in with was patient deposit fertility. They nicely called it fertility deposit is the name they gave it. And then over here on the right, it'll look for all the lines with fertility deposit. And then each night, it'll go ahead and manage that money for you, only applying it if the specific procedure it was intended for occurred. And this will happen until the money is used up. So this avoids those angry patients because they came in for their procedure finally and the money had been used somewhere else. And again, this is truly unique. The Unapplied Deposit Manager is normally installed into your test environment first, and we'll go ahead and work with you on setting up your initial rules. We'll sit down and talk about what you want to accomplish first and what you want to accomplish long term. As I showed you, the rule building is relatively easy. We can go ahead and add a row and call it new rule. And then we can go ahead and come down here and we can either add rows one at a time or there's templates that mimic the rules that I just showed you. So if we were doing a general cleanup, we could go ahead and specify that template and these rules come in. And if we also wanted to make sure that the insurances were zero, it'll go ahead and pull that in too. Hopefully after this demonstration, you have a good idea how the Unapplied Deposit Manager operates. The key is not to memorize everything we told you today, but to remember that the rules are built by you. These specific circumstances and scenarios that we have set up here are just some of the more common ones, but you can create your own rules to accomplish a need that you have that's specific to your practice, or a nuance of one of the rules that's specific to your practice again. We're very hands-on with the installation of it. As mentioned, we'll put this into test with you. We'll help you out trying different scenarios. We'll set you loose to try your own scenarios in there. And then when you're ready to move to production, we'll go ahead and work with your IT staff to install in production. We appreciate you taking the time to watch this demonstration and hope you have a great day.